Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for Tec.nicum Services related to Lockout Tagout. My name is David Shucker. I am Marketing Coordinator for Schmersal in the US. And before I turn this over to today's presenter, I do have some housekeeping to do. This is the GoToWebinar interface. So we do have some handouts that you might want to download. Most of them will be discussed during the presentation. So feel free to do that. There's also a couple of video links that you can look at. During the presentation, if you happen to have any questions about what's being presented, feel free to use the questions box, and we will save all the questions for the end of the presentation. Today's presentation will be recorded, and we will send that out to you either later today or tomorrow. With that being said, let me introduce today's presenter, Devin Murray. Devin is the Tec.nicum Services Manager for Schmersal's Engineering Services Group in North America. He has written many white papers related to safety standards and general machine guarding, conducted risk assessments and validations, and developed and reviewed the implementation of corporate safety standards. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering and an MBA from Alfred University. He is also a TUV certified functional safety engineer for machinery. So welcome, Devin.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this webinar this afternoon as we do something a little different, honestly. If you are familiar with some of our webinars that we've conducted within Tec.nicum Services, hopefully you've noticed that when we present, we are truly a product neutral company or division, and we don't turn our trainings into any type of a product demonstration, right? We talk about standards, we talk about different aspects of machine safety. We've always done that, and again, hopefully you've seen that if you sat through any of our webinars or trainings. Today we're going to do something just a little different. Hopefully you've seen that with the invitation for this webinar, where we are going to talk about some of the services that we are able to offer. Now, even though we are going to highlight some of the services that we offer for Lockout Tagout specifically, we will still provide some educational information, even though we're going to talk about the services that we have to offer. So let's look at what I do want to discuss today with you all, right? So we will again start off with some educational information. We'll talk about the overview requirements for Lockout Tagout briefly. I'll also go into some regulatory insight, some guidance that's out there to help comply with the Lockout Tagout requirements. Then I have a list of what we've seen for challenges in trying to adhere to the Lockout Tagout requirements set forth by OSHA. Then I will go into who we are as far as Tec.nicum Engineering Services. Okay, so some of you may not even know what we do exactly, and maybe you've attended several webinars that we presented, hopefully because we're providing good information for safety, but maybe you don't know exactly what we do for services, right? So I'll go over what we're able to offer at a high level, and then I'll drill down deeper to highlight exactly what we're able to offer for Lockout Tagout. Okay. Dave, I see there's a question in the chat field about background music. Can you check on that? And an error, let me know if that's corrected for you. Okay. So first things first, let's first take a look at this Lockout Tagout requirement that's set forth by OSHA. And I have here what's directly taken from the OSHA's website. Right, so we're looking at 1910.147, which is the legal requirement for the control of hazardous energy. Okay, if we look at what this requirement is, or the scope of this requirement from OSHA, the law of the land, it states that this standard covers the servicing and maintenance of machines and equipment. Okay, with the unexpected initiation or startup of the machines or equipment or the release of stored energy can cause harm to the employees. And this particular regulation establishes the minimum performance requirements to control hazardous energy. And I want to highlight the fact that it's the minimum requirements because depending on the complexity of the machine, depending on the amount of different type of energy sources, you may have to do additional considerations to have this control of hazardous energy or to use this machine in a safe manner. So if we look at just the scope as taken directly from the website, we see that we are focusing on the servicing and maintenance tasks to avoid an unexpected initiation or startup. Okay, that's the scope. We can dive a little deeper into this regulation. Again, we're just going to stick at a high level for this particular webinar. And we can see that the normal production operations are not covered by the standard. And we notice that OSHA 1910.147 here brings in subpart O. Okay, and I will bring subpart O up in 2 slides, I believe. But for right now, it's just stating that normal production operations are not covered. If you're looking at normal production operations, you want to go to subpart O. However, servicing and maintenance tasks, which take place during normal production operations, are covered only if the employee is required to remove or bypass a guard. Okay, so we are physically unscrewing a fixed guard, or we have an access control, spare maintenance key, and we're bypassing the safety device for a particular, a procedure which should have gone through a bypass form to complete, or we are interrupting or not interrupting, but breaking a plane to interact with this machine. Okay, if we are breaking a plane or we are doing removal of a guard, then we are looking into the control of hazardous energy. Okay, there is the exception to this regulation. Okay, so within 1910.147, they have this exception, and they talk about minor tool changes and adjustments, all right, or other minor service activities which take place during normal production operations are not covered by the standard. And then they bring in 3 terms: routine, repetitive, and integral to the use of the equipment of production. And if you have a task that is defined as routine, repetitive, and integral, then you can, I should say, look into subpart O. And again, I'll highlight what that is in 1 second. But we're either looking at the control of hazardous energy, which can be done with lockout tagout, or we're looking at subpart O in order for us to interact with this machine in a safe manner. And again, I want to highlight in this particular slide those 3 parameters: routine, repetitive, and integral. Okay. If we have a task, and you say, you know what, it is routine and repetitive and integral, then we can rely on this subpart O, right? What is subpart O? So again, you can take this directly from the OSHA's website, right? So everything that I'm showing here, you can go to OSHA.gov and pull directly yourself, and you'll see exactly what I'm showing here. But this is subpart O, all right? And it provides machinery and machine guarding standards for general industry, requiring employees to protect operators from hazards like point of operation and ingoing nib points and rotating parts. Okay, we see here on this list that the OSHA may provide guidance on a particular type of machine, like a mechanical power press or a mill. What I have highlighted here is 1910.212, which are general requirements for all machines. And if we look at general requirements for all machines, they will tell us that if we have a hazard on a machine, we have to guard against it. Okay, it tells us we have to guard against the point of operation. It'll tell us that if we're using devices to protect against the hazard, they have to be safety rated. They'll tell us, quote unquote, simple things like we have to make sure that the machine is anchored if it needs to be anchored. Okay, so again, these are general requirements, general basic requirements I want to add. Again, because depending on the complexity of the machine, the hazard that you were able to identify with the risk assessment, you may have to take more consideration, add additional safeguarding measures. Okay, um, to bring this back to the conversation of lockout tagout again, we either looking at the control of hazardous energy, 1910.147. They call out the one way to control hazardous energy is by performing full-blown lockout tagout, which we will discuss. And the other option will be if it's routine, repetitive, or integral, we can rely on subpart O for machine safety and machine guarding. When we look at the lockout tagout requirements from OSHA, right, here are some of the elements that you will need to effectively establish a compliant lockout tagout program. So if you wanted to do uh, a quick checklist, right, just to see are we where we need to be for our lockout tagout program? Do you have all of these elements? Do you have a program with a purpose and scope for lockout tagout? Do you have a definition of authorized and affected employees? Right? Authorized employees will be those who can go into lockout tagout. Right? They've been through the training, they're able to perform it, they can do those tasks. Affected employees will be all those who will be affected. They can't perform lockout tagout, but they need to know what that process is. They need to know not to interfere with the machine if they see a piece of equipment and being locked and tagged out. Okay. Do you have procedures in place for group lockouts? Do you have multiple shifts or multiple teams where you have a procedure for transfers of lockout tagouts and removal of lockout tagout devices? What's your procedure for contractors on site? Okay. What's your management of change procedure for new machines or machines that are being updated? Who's responsible for ensuring that those lockout tagout procedures are up to date? Okay. Um, OSHA requires training. Right? Again, I go back to the authorized and affected employees. Well, who's responsible for that training? Is that something that's being done in house? Are you, have a third party doing this training? How is that training logged? OSHA requires that your training program be audited frequency or annually. Well, when is that? Is that at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, at the start of your fiscal year? When is that, and how is that being recorded? And lastly, you have a program in place. How is that being enforced? Okay. If someone leaves the site and they forget to remove their lock, what is the repercussions of that? Right? Do they have to, do their retraining? What's the enforcement policy? What is your internal standard? Okay, so OSHA requires these elements for a full lockout tagout program. Right. We won't go into each one of these elements for this particular training. I'll explain later on where you may be able to find some additional information here. But I just want to highlight these elements in lockout tagout overall. Okay. Now I want to talk about some regulatory insight. And to do that, I want to first highlight this compliance directive from OSHA CPL 0200147. This was issued in 2008. Okay. It does provide guidance for compliance officers on enforcing the lockout tagout standard. And this document essentially clarifies the interpretations for inspecting hazardous energy control and ensures that there is a uniform approach amongst compliance officers. This is a document, again, that you can download from .gov website. And honestly, it helps you understand what a compliance officer is looking for. Okay, so Hopefully, it will be a situation where an OSHA inspector is doing a random audit, and not the other case where there's an injury and they're called to the site. Okay, so hopefully it's a random audit, and they're on site. If you have access to this document and review this document, you know what they are looking for, right? So you'll be ready for the audit. Um, this compliance directive, because it's providing that interpretation for OSHA and inspectors or compliance officers, it also gives the definition of routine, repetitive, and integral. Okay, and again, I highlighted that in previous slides because these are important terms when we look at lockout tagout, right? Because if we want to say, you know what, we need to perform this task, we need to have power on the machine, we don't want to go into lockout tagout, and we want to classify this task as routine, repetitive, and integral. Okay, well, here within its compliance directive are the definitions for these three terms. And you can utilize these definitions to provide that justification that you would need. Okay, so very important document. Again, it's free. I highly encourage you to download this compliance directive if you haven't already. If you're trying to see what the requirements are for your lockout tagout program. Okay. Additionally, looking at some guidance, right? There's also this ANSI ASSP standard Z2441, which provide guidelines to protect personnel from injury caused by an unexpected inundation or startup or release of stored energy during machine installation, maintenance, and servicing. It's similar to what we saw for the requirements for the OSHA lockout tagout. And if we take a deeper dive into this particular standard, right, it does establish the requirements for the physical isolation or lockout, the requirements for labeling or tagout, the requirements for alternative protective methods when traditional lockout is not possible. It also emphasizes that risk-based approach, that assessment, so that you are able to understand what method will be needed in order to properly and effectively control hazardous energy. Okay, so it goes into that idea, that concept of that risk assessment. And you have to know what hazards are on that machine. What are those hazardous sources of energy, so you know how to control those hazardous sources of energy. Okay. If we now go a little deeper, and I want to highlight some challenges that we've seen in the industry, maybe that you've seen within your lockout tagout programs, or trying to implement your lockout tagout program. Um, what I show here is a chart that I show in a lot of my machine guarding and lockout tagout trainings and webinars, and I've updated it to show the 2025 numbers. But what we're looking at is the OSHA's top 10 violations over the past 10 years. And what we see here is that lockout, tagout, and machine guarding is consistently on this list of top 10 violations. And the way that we can, the way that we view this chart here is, if we look at the first column there, 2015, we see that lockout tagout was ranked fifth on the list with 3,000 violations. Machine guarding was ranked ninth with 2,295 violations. And we can skip over to 2025. We see that lockout tagout was ranked fourth, which is the highest that has been over the past 6 years, with 2,177 violations. And then machine guarding is back at 10, or still at 10, I should say, with 1,239 violations. Now, the reason that I highlight lockout tagout in the machine guarding is because, going back to our previous discussion, if we're not doing lockout tagout, we're not doing the control of hazardous energy, then we can rely on what? Subpart O, right, for machine guarding. Okay. If we take a second and just focus on the lockout tagout, right, being ranked number 4, and we look at some of the primary issues for lockout tagout, we see that there was a lack of written procedures, all right, inadequate training, failure to use lockout devices. And as I go over, some of the services that we're able to offer within Tec.nicum, I'll come back to some of the primary issues, and show how we can help address some of this. Okay, but what we have seen already, when we look at the different elements for a lockout tagout program, we look at, okay, what's needed, right? Those procedures, the scope and the purpose, right? The training logs, that's needed. And we see here the primary issues for those violations are lack of procedure, inadequate training. Okay, so it directly correlates to what's needed, and that we see that gap. Okay, um, the penalty impact. Right, so as we know, if there's any violations with OSHA, we will see that there is some type of penalty, right, financial penalty. And January 15th, 2025, that maximum OSHA penalty for serious and what they call other than serious violations was increased from 16,000, a little over 16,000 to $16,550 per violation. The maximum penalty, as I show here on the slide, for willful, or repeated violations did increase from a little over 161,000 to over 165,000 per violation. Okay, $165,514 to be exact. So this adds up, or it can add up. All right, and what are we looking at? We talk about, honestly, it can be something as simple as a missing scope inside your written documentation. And if that turns into something that is repeated, you're looking at, $165,000 violation for missing documentation, right? Of course, it can be worse than that. It can be a situation where of course, there's an injury, and they look at, okay, you didn't even have proper lockout tackle procedures. You had no lockout tackle procedures, and then of course, yes, we're going to see some and the value or the penalty behind that. But it can add up. Okay, and of course, we want to see how can we avoid that. We want to make sure that everybody remains safe, everybody returns home the way they came into the office. Um, we're looking at these maintenance tasks, right? And a lot of times when we look at these maintenance tasks, we kind of say, you know what, they know the machine a little better than the operator. They're more, intimate with the machine. They know they have to remove a guard. They know the inherent dangers, but we still need to make sure that they're, doing their job safe. Okay, and again, when we look into these top 10 violations, we're looking at lockout, tagout, control of hazard energy, and machine guarding as called out by subpart O. Some common challenges that we've seen, and maybe you've seen, right? And if you've seen any additional ones or have gone through any additional challenges, feel free to use the chat field or the questions, and we can maybe try to answer some of the questions at the end of the webinar here. But things that we've seen have been inadequate or outdated procedures. Right? We talk about what is your management of change procedures. Well, we see that facilities face challenges with outdated lockout tagout procedures due to machine changes or undocumented updates over time. Okay, complex energy sources. Right, so maybe machines with multiple energy sources that require that detailed analysis to ensure that all hazard energy is isolated effectively. And we have to remember there may be, connected energy, stored energy on the machine that we have to address if we're trying to go into a full lockout tagout. Okay, we have to do this analysis. Also, inconsistent training, right? Lack of a consistent training causes employees to have misunderstanding of the procedures, which can lead to unsafe actions or incomplete lockout steps. And this is not only what we've seen as we work within the industry. This is also reflected in what I showed in the last slide, right, for those causes for lockout tagout being worked on the list last year. What else? Insufficient lockout tagout devices. All right, so improper selection or limited availability of lockout devices can cause an unsafe or improvised right lockout method. If we have a line that has 10 sources of energy that we need to lock out, and if you only have 8 locks, what does that mean? Right? What is maintenance going to do? Okay, so again, this is some things that we've seen, and then some of these are not some of these, all these really are quote unquote simple fixes, right? If we look at it, but it also comes back into interpretation and maybe not knowing what what you don't know and what's being called out exactly from OSHA and their legal requirements. Okay. Um, Technicum. All right. So again, the highlight of not the highlight, but the one of the main purposes of this webinar is to go over the services that we're able to offer within Technicum division. Before we went into services, I wanted to talk about, okay, well, what exactly is Lockout Tagout? What's the problem that we've seen with Lockout Tagout? Before I go into the services that we're able to offer, I want to take a couple of minutes here to talk about the company and the division itself. Okay, so very briefly, we look at the Schmersal Group itself. It is a global company, as we can see here. Headquarters is in Wuppertal, Germany. Uh, we've been in business since 1945, so we're going on 81 years of safety. Okay, we're in the third generations of Schmersals running the helm. Right? So it's a family-owned business. More than 2,000 employees in over 20 countries. You also are able to see here with the key on the map, we have multiple production facilities in Germany, China, India, Brazil, and Indianapolis, Indiana. All right, so we will be producing certain parts within our portfolio starting this year in Indiana. So that's we're very excited about that. Um, the Schmozu group itself primarily focuses on safety components and solutions. Okay, and just list here some of the components that are manufactured from Schmerzel, which would include safety door monitoring devices, such as keyed interlock switches, electronic keyed switches, optoelectronic safety devices, looking at light curtains and scanners, command devices with safety functions, your e-stops, your enabled devices, safety related tactile sensors being your safety mats that will be positioned on the ground, or safety edges and bumpers that may be on the edge of a door, of a CNC door, for example. Safe signal processing, which would include general safety controllers or programmable safety controllers, OSI interface components, which OSI being a protocol that combines safe and non-safe signals into a two-channel or two-wire protocol. Position and limit switches and sensors being non-contact devices, devices for hazardous environment or explosion-proof protection, command and signal devices being devices for your control panel, right? Start, reset, and enable buttons for the general purpose industrial environment or environments that would require high pressure wash down and high temperature wash down, cleaning, so devices that are Ecolab approved. Honestly, when you look at the components then inside the Schmersal portfolio, it's everything for the safety function from the door switch to the programmable safety control and everything in between. And we have a pretty large portfolio for safety components as we show there, over 25,000 different safety devices. Now, Tec.nicum Services, all right, is a division within the Schmersal Group which focuses on safety services. And I have a list here. It's not limited to this list, but some of those services include trainings, risk assessments, services to help you conform to CE, measurements and tests, full-blown safety integration, software development, and outsourcing. And I will touch on all of these services at a high level, and then I'll focus in on what we can do for, again, lockout tagout services. Okay, so everything that we do within Technicum falls within one of 6 modules. All right, and the first module being Academy. Academy is the product neutral and safety training programs that we offer that are accredited by IACET, meaning that we are able to offer continuous educational units. These trainings can be something like this, right? A webinar. It can be a training that we host at a hotel conference room for regional trainings. We can go to your site to do a custom training for machine safety. And again, because we are accredited by IACET, and we are a product neutral division, you can be assured that when we are doing training, we are sticking to the requirements, the safety requirements, the safety regulations, that particular safety aspect. And again, we are not turning a training into a product demonstration. Okay. The next module will be consulting, where we offer services related to risk assessments, functional safety. So we're doing the calculations for performance levels for your safety functions, CE conformity. If you're sending machines overseas to the EU, if you're working with machines trying to get UL approval, right? We can help with that as well. The engineering module, we look into measurements and testing. What are those measurements and testing consist of? We're talking about some stop time analyses for equipment that are non-separating. So are you placing light curtains and safety mats at the right distance? EMC testing, pressure and force limiting testing for those applications where you're trying to implement a collaborative application with the robot. Functional safety validation. So again, bringing in the concepts of ISO 13849, where we're introducing faults to a system to make sure that they can withstand the intended faults that safety function has been designed and wired to withstand. Okay. Integration, the mechanical and electrical wiring of safety upgrades. Okay, so full-blown safety installation, whether it's just hard guards, or the integration of safety functions to existing controls. Okay, or if we need to add controls from scratch, we were able to manage these projects and complete full-blown safety integrations. Digitalization. Okay, here we are providing digital tools and software for machine safety aimed at enhancing productivity and compliance for what you can think of for Industry 4.0. So we're actually developing software, and now I'll highlight one in particular as it relates to Lockout Tagout in just a second. The last module will be outsourcing, where we have services related to developing improvements in a production process or an industrial line or installation. Here we've done global project for with value stream mapping, where we've taken production lead times from 70 days down to 25 days, which is about almost a 95% difference in lead times. I don't have the financial dollar impact of what that was, but you can think about a 95% reduction in lead time. That's pretty significant. So everything that we do within Tec.nicum, all of our services related to safety, right, our product neutral approach will fall within one of these 6 pillars. Now, what I want to do is try to highlight some of what's within these pillars and again how it relates to Lockout Tagout, right? The purpose that we're all here today. As I go over the services, I will tie it back to one of these pillars. Okay, the first services that I want to highlight falls back to the academy pillar, right? The education side of it. Right? We're real big on educating. The first 2 that I want to highlight here are free resources. So we do have a free Lockout Tagout course on EHS education. That is a learning management software, so an LMS, where you can create a profile, go into this EHS education, and complete certain training, safety trainings. Okay, and we have one on there now for Lockout Tagout. We're actually in the process of revising this one and adding an additional course. Okay, so again, this is free. Definitely encourage looking into that one. Of course, we do webinars. Right? Of course, we do webinars. All our webinars are recorded, and we have a running list on our website of all our past recordings, which will include this one. But one of the recordings that we've done in the past have been one on Lockout Tagout, where we spent the entire hour talking about the overview for the basic requirements. So again, if you've missed that one, definitely encourage you to go to our website. Take a look at all the other trainings we have as well, the webinars. But again, you signed up for this one regarding Lockout Tagout, you may find that one of interest as well. Okay, those are free. We do, as you'd imagine, offer paid trainings as well. The first one that I want to highlight, of course, is the Lockout Tagout training. Okay, this is a full day training that we can present either online or in person. We try to cap it at 35 attendees. We are offering continuous educational units. So for this course, it would be 0.6 CEUs. I have here on the slide, the learning outcomes, right? What are we talking about for this training program? So we definitely go over the OSHA requirements for Lockout Tagout, right? What are those elements that I listed earlier? We go into full detail of what those elements are and how we can comply to make sure that your Lockout Tagout program is checking all of those boxes. Okay. We also go into that discussion of alternative measures. That usually is a pretty detailed conversation because you're trying to provide justification on not going into a full-blown Lockout Tagout, and then that opens up other dialogues. Okay, but again, this is a full day webinar, either a full day training in person or online. If I take that last note I mentioned about alternative protective measures, okay, it's one thing to say, yeah, we're not going to go into Lockout Tagout, right? Full-blown Lockout Tagout, relying on alternative protective measures. You have to go into the risk assessment process, right? Yes, we can do the risk assessment, but we also, again, we're big on training. So we go through risk assessment training. This is a 2-day training that we offer. We try to max that 30 people. The first half of the day for this particular training, we go over general machine guarding concepts. Okay, think of subpart O from the 1910. The rest of the training, it's some theory with presentation going over the risk assessment process, and then the rest of the training is all practical. So we try to do this particular training at the customer site because we want to go over an actual risk assessment. So we ask you to provide a machine for the training. We go over the theory, the concepts of the assessment, and then we essentially facilitate a full-blown risk assessment process. Okay. Because it's 2 days, we see that those CEUs are now 1.3. We max at 30, but honestly, it's rare that a company has 30 individuals that they can have assigned to do a risk assessment, right? So it's usually maybe 10, maybe 15 individuals that are going through this training for a customer site. But at the end of the day, that's fine, right? Because we do, again, the hands-on portion, right? So we break up into groups and have different groups do the assessments on that machine. At the end of this training, you do have a tool that you can use and implement. Once we leave, you can do your own internal, assessments on your machines. Okay, bringing it back to Lockout Tag, right? You have to go through that analysis to understand what those hazards are, what those energy sources are, so you know how to properly implement Lockout Tagout or alternative protective measures. That conversation for alternative protective measures goes into one more training I want to highlight, which is safety circuit wiring. Okay, one of the common issues that I see is that when someone's trying to justify alternative protective measures and they're utilizing a safety function, that safety function is not providing the necessary safety. All right. So if we look at the requirements for an alternative protective measure, it must provide the same level or more of doing a lockout tagout. Okay, so we can't look at a task based off of OSHA requirement, right? It doesn't fall under the routine repetitive interval. And so it should be locked or tagged out. And we can't say, you know what, we're going to use an alternative protective measure. And, we have this hazardous condition and we're using a single channel non-safety component to monitor the position of the door while we're interacting with this machine. Okay. So this safety circuit training goes over the different types of safety circuits that are available within the industry. We talk about the different types of categories. We introduce the safety circuit. We have the attendees actually wire up the safety circuit. So each attendee will have their own training board. We go over a single channel circuit, right? We talk about it, we wire it up, we introduce faults to the system. We talk about, what may be considered a redundant circuit, and we throw in some faults to the system, and we see what happens. Then we wire up a true, a true redundant safety circuit. Again, introduce faults to the system. Try to get a complete understanding of what a proper safety circuit looks like, especially when we're trying to talk about these alternative protective measures. Right, that's very important. This is 1 day training in person, so we are mailing the training boards to the site, whether again this is at your site as a customer, or if we're doing a regional training at a hotel conference room, having people come over and do some hands-on wiring. Right, so this is all hands-on. For the services in the consultancy module, we are conducting risk assessments. Okay, that yes, we can train on assessments, and yes, we can also come in site to do the assessments. We are a global company, as you saw on the previous slide, so our assessments are based off of ISO 12100 to be consistent. But please be assured that when we do assessments in North America, we are taking into account, of course, OSHA requirements, ANSI regulations. We're able to do those task-based assessments to understand those individual tasks associated with the machine. The reports are then extracted into a Schmersal developed software. Right? So one of the modules that I mentioned previously was digitalization. We are creating software. This one is at least today is an internal software, but we use what we call Blueprint. And if you have sister companies overseas and you want to have a consistent report, we can do an assessment here. We can do an assessment, in India, China, Europe, and the reports that we will provide will be consistent, right? They will have the same look and feel. Okay, so we are doing risk assessments in our own developed software called Blueprint. Here's some screenshots of it. Within the report, you'll get a picture of the hazard, what that rating is for that hazard. We also provide some general control measures. There's a summary page when you have to have those conversations with upper management, right, to look at, okay, what are the hazards and maybe what do we need to address first, right? So a nice little summary page within the report, as well as an Excel file for easy sorting of those hazards. Okay. A key thing here, we talk about documentation, right, is it's providing you that justification for when you're trying to use those alternative protective measures. Okay. We live in a society of lawyers. Okay. We look at the OSHA requirements, the legal obligations. I spoke a little bit about, OSHA inspectors coming in and audits and the financial impact. You want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row, your I's dotted, your T's crossed. You're using alternative protective measures. Show the proof that you've done your assessments, right? Show the proof that your safety circuits are where they need to be. Okay. Under the consultancy pillar or module, we are also able to offer the services to complete lockout tagout procedures. So here we're identifying the energy sources for a machine and creating that placard, right, to help make sure that an unauthorized employee has the proper procedure to go through a lockout tagout steps. Okay, so specific procedural steps for shutting down, isolating, blocking insecure machines or equipment to control hazardous energy. We can use our own placard, our own template. We can customize it. We have situations, or we've had projects where the customer have their own template, and they just didn't have the resources to develop the placard. So we've gone on site and we've done this process using their own template, their own lockout tagout placard. Okay. Digitalization. Okay, so I mentioned Blueprint, and that's an internal software. For this module, we have a software that we are releasing to the market called Tec.nicum, or for digital lockout tagout. This is a web and mobile-based lockout tagout management platform that digitizes and simplifies the entire energy isolation process. So we are moving from a paper-based lockout tagout procedure to something that's more secure and an efficient digital system, but more importantly, compliant, like OSHA compliant. And that's not to say that a paper-based procedure is not compliant. It definitely can be compliant, right? But we go back to something that's more secure and efficient with this software system. Okay, so when we look at digital lockout tagout at a high level, you have a customer admin. So who on your site will be responsible for developing lockout tagout procedures and uploading those procedures to this software? The requester would be those authorized employees, right? Who's responsible for going into a lockout tagout procedure? And then there's the approver. Okay, who's approving the authorized employee to go into a lockout tagout state? So essentially what happens, as we see here on the screenshot on the top of the screen here, is a requester will go to a machine, and instead of relying on a placard, they can scan a QR code. Okay, and what we see there on the bottom screen there, it will be a dashboard. And so we're able to show different matrices on lockout tagout machines and procedures that are taking place throughout the site. at a high level, if we look at again this procedure, someone or not someone, the requester or the authorized employee will go to machine, scan that QR code. Once they get the approvers, right? So once the system says, okay, yep, this person that logged in has training that's up to date, they are an authorized employee. They will then be given the step-by-step instructions on how to do the lockout tagout. So that once paper-based placard is now digitized, and they can go through the step-by-step guidance. They start to place the locks on the lockout locations, take a picture, send it to the approver. And so they capture evidence. The approver looks at the pictures and says, okay, yes, this is where they need to be, and then approves the workflow. The authorized employee can then do their maintenance activities, and then once they're done, they essentially reverse the process, right, and take pictures again as they need to, as they bring the machine or the line back to a ready state. Okay, again, this is at a high level. This is one of the first softwares that we are going to launch. This is not the launching of this software. We are looking to launch this in the second quarter of this year. So once we do that, we will have an official product launch going over the more detail of how to use the software. But because we're talking about lockout tagout, of course, I wanted to highlight what this software is and what this is about. Some of the benefits for using the Tec dLOTO would be improved safety culture, because this enforces consistency and reduces risk with standardized procedures and mandatory checks as we go through the approval process. Faster maintenance turnaround, because now we have instant access to those instructions, and approvals would speed up the isolation and reactivation, or bringing that system back up to a ready state. Quick setup and flexible adoption uh, for easily onboarding teams with bulk uploads. So if you have 100 150 machines and you have different lockout tagout procedures, and you're trying to go from this paper-based system to the dLOTO, you can do a easy bulk upload. And we go back to some of those challenges, right? Management of change, being able to have a process where you can go in and easily modify what those lockout tagout procedures are, and that's instantly changed within the software, and you have that QR code. We don't have to reprint the placard. Again, that quick setup and adaptation. Reduce training time. You have that step-by-step visual, making it easy for new users to follow procedures. So maybe on site you say, what, we don't need to have an approver. Okay, fine. Within the software, you can disable having an approver, right? That the admin can disable having an approver. But maybe we have new maintenance personnel, okay, and they're going through their onboarding process, and yes, they've gone through the training of being an authorized employee, but maybe we want to just double check their work until everybody's happy and comfortable that they can go into that full lockout tag, especially on a more complex system. So in those situations, again, we have that approval process, that new maintenance personnel going through their onboarding process, takes those pictures of those locks, send it to their maintenance manager, for example, and have them check it and say, yep, this is fine, and then approve their work so they can continue on to do their maintenance activities. Lastly, stronger compliance confidence. Right, we have those auto logged actions, those photo evidences to support what's being done for those lockout tagout. I'm not done. Improve collaboration. So improve collaboration keeps teams aligned through that shared digital workflow. Um, we have that minimize paper dependency. Everything is fully digitized, right? Replaces the manual tags, the paper logs, faster incident investigation. So you have those visual logs to enable quick review of what happened and when. Again, hopefully you never never have the situation we have to do an accident investigation, but of course it happens, right? Um, because everything is logged with dLOTO, if we have to go back to say, what, yeah, well, maybe this machine wasn't locked out right and there wasn't any pictures provided, or what, we look at this picture because it's this investigation and we see that not all energy sources were exactly locked out or wasn't locked out correctly. Okay. We also get data, right? So you get live data of which machines are locked out. Maybe you can pull up a history and say, what, there's been this one line has been locked out, 5 times within this month. Okay, and that's the flag, right? Maybe we need to do a deeper evaluation to see what's going on with this process. So there's something wrong with the safeties on there. And then lastly, it's a future ready platform. So we talk about documentation management. Yes, we talk about lockout tagout today, but what about those lines of machines that may need permit to work, or confined space authorization? You can then also apply those to this documentation management or what have you. Okay. We are running up against the top of the hour. Again, the webinar is a little different than what we typically do, but we still wanted to talk about lockout, tagout, provide some education on that, reminders on what that is, what those requirements are, highlight some of those challenges, and of course, show what we can do. Now, some of our services that I don't mention may fall back into the conversation of lockout, tagout, right? If we're looking at, for example, validation of a safety function, I didn't list that here, but if we are helping you perform or develop an alternative protective measure, and we will do the calculations for functional safety as well as the validation for that. Okay, I didn't list that here, but yeah, that would still fall under the services that we're able to offer. Okay, I can go on and on and on about the services, but want to highlight the ones that are focused on lockout, tagout. Want to take some time to see if there's any questions. So I'll bring Mr. Shucker back in and see if any questions came in.
Yeah, thank you, Devin. We do have a couple of questions and we do have a couple of minutes, so let's hit some. I have a question from Andrew. He says, we have multiple locations. Can supervisors at each location conduct lockout tagout inspections, or is it better to have one manager go location to location?
So if you are using multiple individuals to do the auditing, you want to make sure that you have that procedure buttoned up, right? So that it's consistent. That's the main thing. Want to make sure that there's consistency. There's nothing wrong with utilizing the resources at multiple sites. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, you want to make sure that there's consistency. So if there's a checklist that's been developed that they can go through to audit those procedures, just to make sure that each site is meeting those requirements. Okay, so nothing wrong with sharing the resources.
Yeah, from my experience, I used to be an OSHA compliance officer for a company that had multiple locations, and I could tell you that OSHA is basically going to treat your company as one company, regardless of what location that they're in. So if they go to like your Tulsa location and they find a violation, they'll treat that one way. But 6 months later, they can go into, say, Springfield. And if they find that same violation, they're going to bump that up to repeated willful or serious and find you even more because they're treating you as one company. And because you have that previous violation, they would expect that all of your locations would be aware of it. Couple more questions. What are the legal requirements in the U.S. for record keeping? Is there a certain time period for lockout?
Yes, there is. So OSHA requires annual lockout tag inspection records to be retained for a year. So for 1 year. And then for employee training records, they recommended that they be kept during the duration of employment. Okay, so lockout tag inspections for a year, and then the training records for the duration of that worker's employment.
Okay. Well, that was my 3 o'clock alarm that just went off, so we have run out of time. We do have a couple more questions in the queue, but we will get back to each of you individually
Yes.
offline. And just a reminder, this session was recorded, and we will be sending out a link to that either today or tomorrow, and we'll follow up with some documentation of any of the flyers for any of the services that we presented today. I also want to just remind you, if you could take some time, we do have a quick survey that will pop up after you leave. And we want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Perfect. Yes, Dave. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.